In this video, I'm going to demonstrate how to pick up for a V-neck sweater, including how to pick up a stitch right at the center of the piece to create a little spine here in your V-neck shaping. So we're going to go through the whole process of this together in the video. I knit a little prototype V-neck here, so we'll pretend that this is the front of the sweater. Here's a shoulder seam and a shoulder seam, and then this is the back. So here's how the sweater would look if it had a back. So again, this is just a little prototype. I have the yarn I'm going to pick up in. I have my knitting needle, and I have 2 markers and a crochet hook. Let's get started. For this V-neck, I'm going to start here at the back shoulder, and I'm going to pick up stitches all the way across the back neck. So anywhere that you've bound off, which in this case right here at the back neck, I've got a bound off edge or a cast on edge. Anywhere where your stitches are upright, you're going to pick up 1 stitch for every stitch that you've bound off. So I'm going to start right here in this first little V, as I call it, in this first stitch. I'm going to stab my needle in. So I'm not going under the bind off edge. I'm going into the stitch that's below the bind off edge. And I am going to wrap my working yarn around the knitting needle as though I'm knitting and bring through the first stitch. And I'm going to repeat that across the section here. So I started right at the corner, right where the shoulder seam is, and I'm going to go into each stitch, each V. I insert my needle in, wrap my yarn around like I'm knitting, and bring the new stitch up. So if you're an English style knitter, you would go in, wrap the working yarn like you are knitting, and bring it through to the right side. And so again, I'm going into every V, not every hole, but every full stitch, which happens to look like 2 holes as you're picking up. So we've got a little space right here and a space right here. We're going into the second hole, the one that looks like a letter V. And if you have trouble seeing that, just scan your eye down. There we go. So I'm all the way back across the whole back neck from one seam to the other. So in this case, there was no back neck shaping. It was just a straight line. That's fine. Sometimes you'll have little indents. I have other pickup videos that go over that. But for now and for the Book Smart sweater, that's what we have. All right, now coming down the first side of the V, we're actually going to pick up 1 stitch for every row that was knitted. And we're going to pick up in the selvage stitch along the side. So you'll see right on the edge, we have this funky looking stitch. So this is a full stitch, but it looks it doesn't look as nice and neat as these stitches here because it's right on the edge and we have to turn the work around and it creates elongated and sticky stitches. So what we're going to do is we're going to insert our needle underneath that funky looking edge stitch, wrap and pull through a new stitch here. So I'm going into every single row for a V-neck here. When I pick up other things, like say a button band on a stockinette project, I may not go into every hole. In fact, I don't go into every hole. But here, since we have the V-neck shaping, I'm going into every single row. So I'm inserting my needle underneath that edge stitch, that funky edge stitch in the first clean looking column. So right along this line here, I'm going to pick up 1 stitch for every row until I get to the center. I'm going to pick up 1 more stitch right here before I pick up the center. So now here we go. I've made it down my V-neck. And in the Book Smart pattern and maybe other V-neck patterns that you've seen, they ask you to pick up 1 stitch right here in the middle. So I have an even number of stitches on each side. So if this side had 30 stitches, this side has 30 stitches, and there was nothing in the middle. So my project had an even number and I split it right down the middle. But I would like to make this really beautiful spine in the center of my V-neck. So I need to pick up a stitch. What I'm going to do to make the least conspicuous stitch possible is lift up this second bar. So I have this bar here at the top, and then I have 1 bar beneath it of the blue. So I'm going to bring this hook down from above that bar, facing my hook, pointing down, under that second bar, and then I'm going to rotate that hook 180 degrees so it's pointing up. Once I have it pointing up, I'm going to put the topmost bar, the one that I skipped over, on the hook, in the hook part, and pull that through the loop that I picked up. There, what I've done here essentially is I've done a make one stitch on the second bar from the top and then picked up the stitch above it. And then I'm going to put that onto my left hand needle and knit it. Now in this case I have a beautiful decrease pattern that I intend to do here. So my instructions ask us to put a V-neck marker on the work. So I'm going to put a marker right there after that stitch that I picked up and knitted. And now I'm going to come up the side of the work, picking up stitches in the side of the V-neck, the same way I did on this side here. I'm going to go up the work now, up the side of the work, picking up one stitch for every row of the V-neck until I get to where I started picking up. And here we go. I'm back at the seam where I began. And just a side note, I like to leave all my tails until the very end, not only because it's my least favorite part of any project, weaving in tails, but because if I need to undo something, I find it easier to have the tails available to me. Also, it's easier to pick up stitches and do work when you don't have dense sections where tails have been woven in. All right, so I'm placing my beginning of round marker, and for this first round I'm working a knit one, purl one ribbing, and I'm going to work to 2 stitches before the center V marker. Okay, so here I am 2 stitches before my center V marker, and I'm going to make note of the stitch that I worked just before. So I worked a purl stitch right here, and now I'm at these 2 stitches. This is important to note because I want symmetry on the side of that center spine. So if I have a purl stitch here, after I work my center decrease, my center double decrease, I'm going to work a purl stitch on the other side of it and pick my ribbing back up with a purl stitch. If I had knit this stitch before working the center double decrease, then I would knit the stitch on the other side. All right, so in my case, I have a purl stitch, and now I'm going to work the center double decrease. So again, I'm 2 stitches before the marker, which means that my center stitch is right here. I'm going to work a center double decrease, and what that means is I'm going to insert my needle into these 2 strands, 2 stitches together, as though I'm knitting 2 together. I'm going to remove the marker momentarily and knit the 3rd stitch. So I've slipped the first 2 together, knitted the 3rd stitch. Now what I'm going to do is insert my left hand needle into these 2 slipped stitches at the same time and pull them over the single stitch like this. And what that does is it is a centered double decrease. So I've subtracted 2, hence the double decrease, and it's centered over the middle stitch. Then I'm going to replace my marker, and to know what to do on this first stitch here, I'm going to do whatever I did right before the center double decrease, in this case a purl stitch. So I'm going to work my ribbing back up to the marker that marks the beginning of the round, right over here. And as I get to the end, if I would end with a knit stitch, if I have a number that would make it so that I'm ending with a knit stitch, I'm just going to work a purl 2 together at the end. So let's see if that happens to me here on my little miniature V-neck. Knit, purl. Oh, great. Here we go. Knit, and then I have 2 stitches left. So I would like to end with just a purl 1 and not a knit 1. So I just knitted a stitch. My next would be a purl, and then I'd have a knit, which would be problematic since I have one on the other side of the marker here for the beginning of the round. So just for this first round, after I've done that knit 1, if you have 2 stitches left at the end, what you're going to do, purl 2 together. And now your ribbing is set, where you've knit 1, purl 1, knit 1, purl 1, knit 1, purl 1 at the end. And then you move your marker and you begin your ribbing again. Now for the second round, you're going to work that ribbing all the way around until you get to 2 stitches before your center marker, before your V-neck marker, and you're going to work that center double decrease again. So we're approaching the center again. So I'm going to work in the ribbing until we get to 2 stitches before the center. Here we go. And now we're going to work the center double decrease. And I've just knitted a stitch. So I'm going to work, slip 2 stitches together as if I'm knitting 2 together, remove the marker, knit the 3rd stitch, and then pass the 2 slipped stitches over that knit stitch as though you were doing a bind off. And you're going to replace the marker and continue ribbing. And you'll notice I've got that symmetry right here. I have a knit stitch on this side and a knit stitch on that side, and there's my center spine of the V-neck decrease. So you're going to continue working in that way, the ribbing with that center spine decrease. And when you bind off, you'll bind off in ribbing and work a center spine decrease at the center as you're binding off to help maintain that nice sharp point. Here we are, I'm ready to begin binding off. And to bind off in pattern, I'm going to work a knit stitch and then a purl stitch and bring the 1st stitch over the 2nd and off for a normal bind off. Knit 1, bind off, purl 1, bind off, and so forth. Working your bind off in ribbing pattern. All right, so we're almost to the center double decrease as I'm binding off here. There we go. All right, so now I'm 2 stitches before the marker. I just bound off. I have 1 stitch on my right hand needle. I'm going to slip 2, knit 1, pass the slipped stitches over the knit stitch, and work my bind off at the same time. So I worked the center double decrease while I am binding off. And now I'm going to continue binding off in pattern to the end of the row. Here we are at the last stitch. I cut the yarn and I'm going to fasten off the tail. To do that, what I do is I just keep pulling this loop up, 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 up until the tail pops out. Then to bridge this gap here that you get from the final bind off stitch and the first bind off stitch, you're going to put your yarn onto a tapestry needle, and we're going to insert the tapestry needle from the right side toward the wrong side under the very first bound off stitch. So if you see that beautiful little V there, my needle is coming through there. And then I'm going to bring it straight down the last bound off stitch into the heart of that bound off stitch. And just like that, you create this nice bridge between that gap. And then you would weave your tails in. And here is the really pretty V-neck edging on this sweater with a nice sharp point here and that center spine that came out of the increase. That 1 stitch that we picked up in the middle. Looks really good. Happy knitting!